evening, good afternoon, wherever you are at. Whoa, wait, what just happened here? There we go. There we go. Let me do... Oh, I can't do that. All right. What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Lou Reviews, the destination for critical thinking in the realm of the unexplained. I am your host, Luis Jimenez. I want to say thank you to everyone who is here in the chat. Give you some shout outs at the end of the show. Before we get started, of course, we want to say please like, share, subscribe to the show. If you're listening on podcast, come check us out on YouTube. It's the full unedited version of this show. Like, you know, our fun beginnings of this show in the last 6 months have been unreal. But anyway, we are where we are. We've got a great show today. Art Levine is in the house. He's going to be here in about 10 minutes at most, I hope. Before I guess we get into Art Levine, let me go ahead and just say what's up to everyone in the chat. Simon Fly, Swint McLeod, Stoned Ape, Art Lewis. Art Levine will be checking in shortly backstage, according to Art Lewis. Thanks for the update. Kimball Mortensen, what's up? My dudes, Dana Shadell, thank you for being here. Flashback 01, hey, right back at you. Okay, so we've got a lot of stuff that's happened here in the last, few days again. And it's wonderfully wild and in some parts hilarious, as always. They did a live YouTube stream of X-rays and found some bits of interesting stuff here. They finally found the jet that crashed. I believe it was in South Carolina, if I'm not mistaken. A lot of weird stuff's been happening. But before Art gets here, I guess let's cover one of these things here. We have video of Jaime Maussan freaking out when he's asked real questions. But this is an interesting clip that was on Cam Capone News. And before we get started, I might as well, let's switch to this because I just know this is set up for when Art gets here, so it's not totally on the full picture here. Anyway, you'll see part here, but want to say fair use. This is a transformative work. We are educating the public and critiquing the videos we are sharing. This is covered under fair use and allowable by law. Okay. So according to Stephen Greer, we've shot down 122 extraterrestrial vehicles with electromagnetic weapons. He's mentioning Sergeant Clifford Stone from the Disclosure Project, who claimed to handle and retrieve alien bodies from some of these. Let's see, I hate that Twitter does this. This is so lame. From these shootdowns. Greer says he has a new whistleblower coming forward that had an encounter in northern Nevada with a downed UFO and met 2 aliens before the UFO took off. Stephen Greer says the aliens were incredibly nice people. He also says he has a list of 147 facilities where the alien UFOs and bodies have been stored, but in a previous interview, he said he needs more whistleblowers to tell him where these alien craft are located. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Dr. Stephen Greer.
You mentioned that there was around, I think you said 120 aircraft shot down?
122 cases that we know of extraterrestrial vehicles that have not been shot down with kinetic missiles, but with electromagnetic weapons.
Okay. If we're shooting down their aircraft, why would they keep coming back? And did we ever recover any aliens from this stuff?
Oh, sure. Yeah, if you look at the Disclosure Project material, including on my YouTube channel, the interviews with some of the men that were on these retrieval teams, You'll see, for example, Sergeant Clifford Stone, who was on in the 60s. He's just recently passed away. Was on a team retrieving the bodies and handling them from these downings. Yes, we have multiple people who've been involved in those operations. I have a new whistleblower coming forward who was doing that in northern Nevada out of a helicopter base where they had downed an ET vehicle, although it did not get destroyed and it ended up taking off again, but not before this military top secret guy had an encounter with two of the ETs who were incredibly nice people, apparently, and were kind of appalled that we were still doing this. So,
but they still keep coming here.
Places where I know
it's so stupid. It's so dumb, dude. Like the interviewer asked, like, why would they keep coming here? And if they did keep coming here, why wouldn't they just attack us and obliterate us? Why would they go through all of these shenanigans of kidnapping cows and people? It's so nonsensical, man. Stephen Greer.
Know that these objects have been downed, and I have a list of about 147 facilities where the objects have been stored.
Hashtag stand with Bijou. Oh my God. If you guys don't know the Bijou story from Stephen Greer, maybe we'll have time at the end of the show to look up the Bijou story. It's so stupid. But apparently that was the name of one of the aliens that he met on one of his CE5 experiences, if I'm not mistaken. And he's got a picture of him too and everything. It's really wild.
Stored, or where they've been taken to, where the bodies are stored. And all of this is I'm in the process of handing over to the Senate and House investigators and the Pentagon.
That's the one crazy thing he said. And then there was another thing he said on somebody else's show. I don't know if I bookmarked it. I may not have. Oh, that's because that's the comments for that. Let me go back here. We also had, and this was a great little sort of moment here too, in ufology, Sager and Jetty. So Sager, I don't know what, I genuinely don't understand the push of the UFO narrative that Sager and Jetty has undertaken. If you watch Sager and Jetty, and I've watched a lot of Sager and Jetty, he actually helped us with the first big phone home. He tweeted about it. At first, it seemed just like sort of like, hey, this is interesting. You know, like the DOD videos, the guys who are coming out, the credibility that was attached to them, like the same things that I fell for, the same things that everybody seems to fall for. And because they're compelling, and no one's seen this from the government in quite a long time, to be honest. And so it, I think, piqued the interests of journalists like Sager and Jetty, who, if I'm being honest, is one of these media trailblazers that really has built him and Crystal Ball have built their own little media empire, and it's impressive. I'm not going to knock it. It is an insanely impressive platform, but the way this guy pushes the UFO narrative is really, really, really strange, and how hard he pushes it. And I mean, this is the kind of guy who gets upset when people don't show up to the White House or the halls of Congress without a tie and a suit and looking respectful. Like, this is the kind of guy he is. And the fact that he's sort of pushing Jeremy Corbell in a wrinkled t-shirt with rolled up sleeves and, you know, button halfway down his chest, like, you know, it's weird. It goes against everything that I've seen sort of Sager and Jetty report on and how he reports on things. He's just like this new young wave of Republican progressives that first started out as genuine progressives and now have leaned toward this like really like just right-wing sort of thinking. It's odd, and the Jeremy Corbell sort of pushing of this end of this is wild. But this was a cool moment because he asks Neil deGrasse Tyson about the debate that Dave Grusch issued to Neil deGrasse Tyson on Jesse Michaels' little, Jesse Michaels tells all / David Grusch hangs out interview, on The American Alchemist. And so now that this challenge is put out there by this famous, respectable, hero and whistleblower, now Sager and Jetty asks a real physicist, scientist, professor, genuine smart guy, and this is his response.
Very excited to welcome to the show astrophysicist and author of the new book To Infinity and Beyond, the one and only Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Oh,
welcome,
man,
sir. So great to have you. It's an honor.
Clip.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
I'm delighted by the Lincoln Memorial behind you. It was probably just a photo. That's fine.
It's a screen, video screen.
Yeah, it's a video screen, to be clear.
Yes, and I appreciate your background as well. It's quite lovely and appropriate.
Floating in space.
There you go.
I bet he ends with
So
it.
let's start with the most basic question. What do you want people to get from the new book? Do you worry at all about the profit motive sort of supplanting the motive of just scientific curiosity as...
Who's got... I'm flattered and honored that he would call, name check.
Okay. Yeah, this is it right here.
Nothing wrong with that either.
Well, sir, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. You really got us thinking, and we appreciate you joining us. We got the book right here in front of us. We're going to have a link down in the description. Encourage everybody to go and buy it.
And I just want to conclude here by saying our UFO guy,
yes,
who's got... I'm flattered and honored that he would call, name check me in the press, politely name check me. And I just want to say it's not to debate. You just bring it out.
Bring it out.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's not just him. It's Congress too, though, to be fair.
It's what you say?
It's not just him. It's he wants to put the information out. It's Congress who has had some issues there, as well as the intelligence community.
Yeah,
but
so
I agree with you. It should come out.
Let him figure it out, and then call me.
Okay. All right. Did you hear that, David Grusch? Yeah.
No. What it is that the aliens come. It's like they say, "Take me to your leader." I'm not bringing it to the president. No.
Okay.
I don't care who the president is. It's going to NASA. Okay. There it is.
All right. Well, thank you very much, sir. I'm sure that'll go out. All right.
Thanks.
So what's funny is I didn't even actually see the end of that. So either he basically encapsulates everything he says to Sager in this moment, because Sager asked him about this debate challenge. And I said when I saw it and we reviewed the show, or the whatever we want to call it, Jesse Michaels explains everything about UFOs. I said, like, what's to debate? He can't debate you. You're not bringing any facts to the table. Like, how is it possible to debate somebody that's got classified information? And Neil deGrasse Tyson doesn't have classified information that he's looked at to go, yo, you're wrong. It's so stupid. It's the dumbest debate challenge that's ever been put forward. And what's even more hilarious is Jesse Michaels actually put up a $50,000, if I'm not mistaken, $50,000 challenge. Hey, if you debate Dave Grusch, we'll give a $50,000 to your favorite charity. I don't think no, I didn't, but I could look it up because I definitely tweeted about it. But okay, we'll talk about that a little later, because we just had Art Levine pop in to the backstage of the show. So let's go ahead. Let's get Art. Art, how you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Okay, great. So you can hear me. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Welcome to the show. Okay, so before we get into this, I just want to introduce everybody to who Art Levine is. So he's a journalist who's dedicated his entire career to researching and writing important, compelling stories, often showcasing the best and worst of healthcare. He's now started offering his editorial skills to nonprofit media outlets, businesses, and individuals seeking first-rate writing, research, and editing. He's a contributor to the Washington Monthly, Newsweek contributor, and a former health policy fellow with the Progressive Policy Institute. He's also written for the American Prospect, the New Republic, the Atlantic, Slate, Salon, and numerous other publications. He's an author of a recent book called Mental Health, Inc., How Corruption, Lax Oversight, Failed Reforms endanger our most vulnerable citizens. So, Art Levine, did I miss anything?
No, except my recent investigative articles have been in the Washington Spectator, and it's a two-part series on corruption, hype, fraud, deception, lies, and the conning of mainstream media, Congress, and apparently the Pentagon.
On UFOs,
to a certain degree.
On UFOs in particular, right?
UFOs and
okay. So how do we before we get into the two-part article, which, by the way, if you haven't checked it out, as soon as the show's over, I'll have a link to both articles in the show notes down below. How did we go from exposing the most vulnerable citizens in the healthcare system with lax oversight and corruption to then going to lax oversight, corruption within this UFO narrative that's been pitched, especially since 2017?
Well, part of it is that I have a background in investigative reporting, and I don't like cons and frauds and phony claims in any field. Now, it turns out that back in the 90s, when I was a writer with U.S. News and World Report, I wrote an article about the anniversary at that point. I guess it was the 50th anniversary of Roswell. And I wrote an article raising questions about the Roswell narrative and quoting a book by Cal Korff, looking at it. And this is hard to believe. So I was also on assignment to do some additional reporting on hoaxing in the paranormal field. And one of the things that I found is we looked at the this is hilarious. We looked at the building on Mars claims on the Art Bell show, and I did a tracking down a hoax caller to Art Bell. So I was always sort of interested in that. And then I learned firsthand there was a witness to Roswell named Frank Kaufman, who was later disavowed, but he claimed to have, been at, saw the craft and the bodies and then went with it to an air base, and he made all these elaborate claims, and he was still living when I called. So I called him up, and then within 30 seconds, it was clear what we in Yiddish call an altacocker, was just making stuff up. And then I'd also checked out his military records at the depository in St. Louis, and he couldn't have been serving in the areas he said he did. And so this guy was considered like the breakthrough witness, and his story fell apart. Does it have any echoes to today's storytelling? I think so. So then, I kept a loose monitoring of this issue, and then I learned about allegations that had been filed against TTSA, Tom DeLonge, Chris Mellon, Lou Elizondo, and others related to the claims that they had been making about TTSA when it was launched in October 2017 and got mammoth publicity with the error-filled New York Times article that was also deceptive in December 2017, led and driven by Leslie Keene. And so I learned about the pending complaint that had been going on, filed by a whistleblower and investigative author, Cal Korff, who also has filed similar, raising questions about fraud, both in terms of that organization and then with the complaint that's pending with the Council of Inspectors General, so covering all the major government agencies. And some of those allegations are listed in my first article, which is called Spaceship of Fools. So I basically have been following these developments. But what is happening now to me, and I follow you closely, Stephen Cambion, Stephen Greenstreet, Jason Calavito, Mick West, Michael Shermer. I do follow the skeptics, but I also follow some of the well-informed people who are either neutral or leaning towards, but provide good information. So that's like D.D. Johnson, Matt Laszlo, even if they're biased, or Mike Colangelo. So I try to keep. I get fascinated by it, but we are now in a very critical phase of this movement when David Grusch his story is starting to really fall apart, and that's what I focused on in my article that appeared on September 8th, and about the witness testimony. And that was before the new revelations, where the Inspector General writes back to Tim Burchett saying, hey, we didn't look into any of these alien claims that we basically, in response to Burchett's letter, where he got other believers in UFOs, including Moskowitz on the Democratic side, to write a letter to the Inspector General of the Intelligence Committee. But as I pointed out, it's kind of notable that not a single member of either party of the House Intelligence Committee, not one, found it important enough to ask the Inspector General of the intelligence community to reply. Now, that should be a kind of red flag. They're the expert. Why is it important? Because they're the staff got a briefing of his findings for about 4 hours in December. And I want to credit, even though I think his reporting is biased, Matt Ford of the Good Trouble Show, for pointing out the depth of the staff there, how long he was there, and then, but what later was revealed in a kind of interview of Burchett, and this was a very excellent catch by Steve Cambion. And the catch was that Burchett conceded that he learned that the Intelligence Committee staff did not find Grusch to be a reliable witness. So then he dismisses what he's been told, saying, what do they know? They're not elected. And then, in the craziest thing that should be in the category of Jewish space lasers like Marjorie Taylor Greene, he ends up saying, well, there are honeypots like in Russia that seduce people, meaning honeypots is his term. Vixens were seducing the staff of he's suggesting that honeypots sent over from Russia or from the evil deep state of QAnon lore or military contractors are seducing members of the House Intelligence Committee, perhaps, or Mike Turner or their staff, to lie or blackmail them to not reveal just how honest and accurate David Grusch is. Now, that sheer craziness should be enough to make Burchett simply an embarrassment, if he wasn't already, to anyone who's pushing forward. But it seems like the mainstream media, and certainly much of the pro cheerleading UFO media, Debrief, Coulthard, others, Leslie Keane, are kind of ignoring the sheer nuttiness of this.
Right. Wow. Okay. Well, that was a lot. Thank you. That was a good encapsulation, sort of the two articles that you wrote. So, oh my gosh, where do I start? Why is this important to uncover from just, I guess, an American citizen standpoint? Like, why should the average citizen care that the government is it seems like, anyway, from your article, that the government in some ways is playing games with the public and somebody's trying to get funding for something. whether it be
Well, yeah,
an OSAP 2.0 or
yeah, I think that's where things like Americans for Air Safety or whatever
Americans for Safe Airspace,
Ryan Graves group is, and certainly there are people seeking more funding. And here's the larger point. I do think, polling shows that a majority of Americans definitely believe there's, been think it happened or likely that there's been alien visitations. Okay, of some
kind. What are your
kind.
personal thoughts, just quickly?
My personal thought is there's no evidence for it, and I stand with Enrico Fermi, which is called the Fermi paradox, which is given the multiplicity of the universe, where is everybody else?
Right.
So, but here's the danger. Here's why I think it's important. Beyond the clickbait and audience baiting going on, like News Nation is zooming in its ratings from a third tier cable network and so on, this is a form of essentially conspiracy thinking that could prove to be dangerous, and because of the narrative that there's an evil cabal covering it up, probably deep state, that even though UFO belief systems draw from both people of the left and the right and the New Age community and the far right community and just normal people who are expressing their interest based on the volume of publicity, there's a danger there. And I pointed that out in the first article, and then I looked at it again in the harassment. And, you yourself have discussed about the issue of targeting that you faced and the email that I believe it was you got that referred to them conceding that video podcasters critical of Blue Whale Thunder. But there's a broader danger. And here's what to me is the broader danger. This is in large part, not completely and not everyone, but the danger that a subset of people will be holding these extreme paranoid anti-government views that are fed by people like Tim Burchett and Jeremy Corbell in particular, who uses phrases like "let the bodies fall," quoting the great rock anthem, and other kind of kick down the door, and
loves the smell of napalm in the morning shit.
Yeah, and the call to arms and their latest weaponized, like, we got to fight back against the pushback. Now, here's the point. The phrase call to arms is not in and of itself illegal or threatening, but to people who have mentally unhinged, who are getting these endless messages about an evil government cover-up that is withholding this noble truth and blocking us from getting such wonders as free technology and free energy that could wipe out the fossil fuel industry.
Nobody wants to talk about the nuclear engines that sit in the aircraft carriers and the nuclear submarines where they don't have to ever refuel. Nobody wants to talk about that clean energy and that form of I wouldn't say free energy. You could definitely monetize it, but it's a better way than fossil fuels. And nobody wants to say, hey, what about that tech?
Well, yeah, actually, but in other incarnations, I interviewed Helen Caldicott for Truth Out about nuclear fuel has its own waste products, and nuclear energy is not a panacea for clean energy. But the point I'm making is that this is I consider the extreme. There is real reasons and sensible reasons for people to be interested in the existence of extraterrestrial life, and given the volume of reports, to be interested in UFOs. What is happening, though, is this dangerous conspiracy theory, and what sets this conspiracy theory apart from other conspiracy theories that draw from across the ideological spectrum, like the anti-vax movement, for instance. And I wrote a book exposing Big Pharma and their over medication with off-label psychiatric drugs. What the danger is that this is getting a essentially free pass by mainstream media, as this is genuine and it's being covered up, and the government needs to be more transparent. It does need to be more transparent. I would agree with that. But the way everything is framed and the amount of deception and lies, and that got its biggest, that got the starting gun was the New York Times article in 2017 with Blumenthal and Leslie Kean, True Believers and Easy Marks for wild tales of UFOs, getting the ball rolling in the New York Times. And they're, ignoring the role of Skinwalker Ranch, which Bigelow got $22 million, and much of their research, as Stephen Greenstein has demonstrated, has been for studying goblins and wolves. And all of this is hidden from mainstream discourse. Right. And it's given the blessing of right-wing and left-wing and centrist media and a cross ideology in Congress. And for unhinged people, some of them will do violent acts, and some of that I have discussed already in my first book involving murders, which is rarer. But I think that what Burchett and Corbell is doing is creating a groundwork for what maybe is called in other arenas stochastic terrorism, where you have the rhetoric and it can trigger deranged lone wolf actors to take violent acts.
Well, I always compare this because my frustration, especially with exactly what you're talking about here, is we've got an opportunity where lawmakers can add a lot of clarity to the discussion. And instead, they put in a lot of inference and sort of, ooh, it could be this. And instead of being clear with the American people about what it actually is and the data that they have, but just what can't be shared with the public because it's classified, whatever.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I agree. I think what's happened, though, is as time has gone on, the DOD's formal statements, and I think it's worth your readers reading, even though she's critique, the statement from the spokesperson on UFOs, DOD Susan Goff outlined very clearly two critical points in an in-depth statement to me that I publish in the article and your readers can read. Is, to give an example, so they're getting more forceful in trying to push back against it, but they have allowed, in terms of like withholding things that shouldn't be classified from researchers like John Greenwald, they're helping feed the narrative. And they've also, it's my view, and I refer to the approach of DOD as maddening. They have a lot of ambiguity and ambivalence in their public statements. And given the long history, I mean, it goes back decades, most of the DOD and intelligence agencies putting out false narratives about UFOs to distract from secret aviation politics, secret aviation projects. It's my view that DOD is not doing is doing a real slam dunk critique because they want to keep the belief going. Even though they put out, to me, it's kind of, the putting out, statements on paper, but they like the belief system to continue because it does gives them cover for current and future aviation projects of our country and other countries.
Well, it was going back to what you had said earlier, this idea of this call to arms. Like when they attack you, they also use those key words that in my mind can trigger that person to do a crazy act on a la the realm of a Pizzagate, where you get inside these people's heads so hard that they believe the vice president of the United States is, or the Secretary of State is a child blood drinking demon, and she drinks the blood of children to keep her youth, and she's a reptilian and all this crazy stuff, and it leads to this pizza shop and somebody ends up getting killed, and they attack you with words like traitor and backstabber, which is like, when I was attacked with, those were the two words where I was like, are you kidding me? Like, those are the words you use when you're about to hang someone.
Yeah, but also it's part of the rhetoric of dehumanizing. So one of the things that I highlighted to a certain degree in the first article and drilled down to in the second article was what some people on UFO Twitter have called the UFO hate group, the kind of venomous rhetoric and some stalking and harassing and doxing that has faced people like NASA's Nancy Drake and Jeremy McGowan after he broke with Lou Elizondo. And the danger is the rhetoric. So when I guess because I'm Jewish and have studied the rise of authoritarian movements, backstabber and traitor was the stabbed in the back was the big lie of Nazi Germany. The Jews sold us out in World War I, and now we're facing our destroyed Germany. And the big lie of the Trump administration, of course, was that the election was stolen and rigged by voting machines planned for by the now dead Hugo Chavez. Okay, so it's hard to say there's so many big lies coming out, and it is kind of like what Steve Bannon does, and also a Russian analyst and advisor. It's called it's a firestorm of lies, and it's just endless lies. And then they are.
I feel like they're lies speckled with truth at the exact same time.
Oh, obviously that is the case.
Yeah.
So in other words, but to me, for instance, this is a little arcane, but scholars of conspiracy theories talk about traditional conspiracy theories over, let's say, the JFK assassination or 9/11 being an inside job, or the government let it happen, or even anti-vax conspiracy theories. There's some elements of tiny kernels of truth, and the UFO is in that older style of, I think the UFO conspiracy theories is there's something people can point to that then can feed those beliefs. But what's happening right now is the level of hoaxing has gone so crazy with the Mexican aliens, and there's literally nothing behind the Mussolini UFO case that Grusch cites. And to me, the significance of that case and why the expert work of Jeff Knox at Twitter, at Mr. Jeff Knox, is pointing out, and I interviewed Alex Cianetti, an Argentinian-born UFO researcher and TV producer who had the first of the original documents that were the hoaxed original documents. The reason that's important is when we get into the Mexican aliens and the UFO Mussolini hoaxes that are so clearly hoaxes, and I would say a significant minority, or not a majority necessarily, people on UFO Twitter believe these, we are getting in very dangerous test area where there's literally no good evidence to support it. On the other hand, it is still like the difference between the QAnon blood libel myth derived from anti-Semitic lore that Hillary Clinton and Tom Hanks had a pedophile satanic cult is there's zero evidence or anything to point to, and yet 30% of the Republican Party believe it. 12% of Americans in one poll of all Americans believe that the government and our society are ruled by lizard people.
Right.
And we're now getting into the super crazy viewpoints. And that's what's dangerous. Plus people being incentivized, if they're deranged, to take violent actions.
Right. Well, they're incentivized, and in some cases they're encouraged to take those violent actions. I mean, we've seen folks on different podcasts and shows confess and sort of gloat at the harassment that they've put on the folks that you named from NASA in particular.
Right. And then also Sean Kirkpatrick. And what's so, is, like, for instance, Sean Kirkpatrick, this is, has been accused of being a handmaiden of the cover-up because he found no evidence so far of proof of aliens. On the other hand, he was, I guess, beloved by them when he co-authored a paper with Avi Loeb indicating that the extra celestial object might have been coming from aliens and so on. So he allied with that. What's the irony here is the entire superstructure of congressional hearings, the UAP task force, the office, the new Arrow office under Kirkpatrick and all its different incarnations, all is in response to the demand by the public fed through cable TV and in particular the New York Times. We want to get to the truth of the UFOs. So when they report back, we haven't found any evidence, then they're accused of the cover-up. And the cover-up is the ultimate convenient narrative that has been in place for 75 years. I mean, and they go, well, other things were covered up, but almost every other cover-up you can think of. And Michael Shermer's videos on this is quite good. If you look at the Panama Papers, the Pentagon Papers, Watergate, all of the, everything that Snowden got hold of, all of the damaging actions by governments over the years, eventually some of it leaks out with hard evidence. But that hasn't happened here.
Yeah. Well, just going back to Loeb and Kirkpatrick, and going back to sort of confusing messages, like, to me, that's a confusing moment. Like, why is Kirkpatrick co-authoring a paper with Dr. Avi Loeb, who is clearly for the last 2 years sort of been placating to this segment, this really big, it's a cash cow. I mean, like, if you look at the numbers, for example, Gaia, the Gaia network, and
the Gaia network,
like how much money that network made off of just fraudulent statements
Corey Good, David
Corey
Wilcock,
Good,
Mexican aliens, Peruvian aliens,
and I mean in the billions. Like, it's and
I don't know if it's in the billions, but it makes a lot of money. And here's where I think the UFO skeptic and centrist and journalistic and hopefully legal communities needs to move. Yes, they're making endless money, and where things have stood until now is skeptics who don't have the larger audience, and mainstream journalists is too hungry for clickbait and TV ratings, isn't raising hard questions. In other words, if this was in the that's what I was trying to do, is to bring the skills of investigative reporting and mainstream journalistic standards to this issue. And so I sought comment and rebuttal. And some people who were accused of making fraudulent claims, like Nick Pope, who had claimed for years and now is sort of backing away slightly, but it's still on his website, to have headed the British Ministry of Defense UFO research project and has been a UFO expert. Well, he is now facing charges of fraud put forth in local police departments in some states, in some locales where he has lived, in Arizona and California. And some of that has been outlined by Cal Korf, who's filed some of these complaints. But we're facing right now, in my view, is that what I'm trying to say is the skeptics and questioning journalists are sort of sniping from the side while a steamroller, is growing about UFOs are real and the government is hiding it up. And so the fever is not going to break it may not even break after this, but until, for instance, if Gaia made money hawking completely fraudulent Mexican alien things and ignored all the evidence. It's possible, and they took money at $100 a year. It's possible someone could file a lawsuit. Or if Stephen Greer holds, conferences or his trips, and he's charging $5,000 to be able to see spaceships, and he's either faking it or playing into people's beliefs about the lights in the sky. If they're attacked civilly or criminally. Similarly, there's an ethics complaint that's probably not going to go anywhere in the House or in the Senate, but it does provide some evidence that Corf put together regarding Tim Burchett and also people on the Democratic side who had been championing these things like Kirsten Gillibrand. And so it's my view that, but he's like one guy putting this stuff together based on a background of 50 years in this field. And yes, there have been critics of him, much of it driven by a cult group called the Billy Meyer cult that he started attacking in the mid-90s. But the point is, I think this is until somebody loses millions of dollars,
right,
and then is shut up, and then of course the true believers will go, well, that's the deep state, it was conspiracy against them. But if enough people lose millions in lawsuits and one or two people at least get arrested for crimes related to consumer fraud, then I think this will just keep rolling on. I think something to look forward to, possibly, given how much that this is just speculation. I have been critical of Lou Elizondo's claims, as have you and many others, and it's pretty well documented now, based on his own filings with the Inspector General that weren't really looked into, that he just was making up his role as the head for much of its time of the $22 million project. He had a hobby-like activity called ATIP.
Yeah.
And he had a hobby-like activity called ATIP that was he then claimed was what was featured as the actual $22 million project. Elizondo has a book coming out. He's been promising the book for a long time. Yeah. I think it's possible, either through any kind of legal complaint that might be filed against his publisher, or the publisher begins reviewing the news coverage of him to have second thoughts about the claims that he is making in that book. Now, I haven't seen the book. I don't know, but if his claims in the book are anything like the claims he has been making to the public since 2017, most have been shown to be exaggerations or not backed up by evidence or outright fabrications, then maybe his book is in trouble. And one thing I'd urge you to read, I really loved John Greenwald when he got his memos back. Eventually, about the response of his immediate superiors to the 2017 article.
Yeah.
That the amazing part is his immediate supervisor, who I know the UFO Twitter community doesn't like, they were all shocked that he was making, you see their internal memos. What program was he head of? What is this about? What's he talking about? They express shock. And then he gives a variety of stories about why he's leaving. But the most telling moment in those series of memos is when he tells his immediate supervisor, related to DIA type issues, is he's an employee of the Defense Department. He says, I have been, words to this effect, on a super secret project on UFOs directly for the Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, and you can't know anything about it because you don't have the authority to be read into it. And so the memo writer goes, I check with people up the chain. This doesn't appear to be true. In other words, you are quitting and you have the pathological liar intention to actually claim that the person on top of your bureaucracy is working with you personally on a secret, super secret UFO program.
and nobody else is allowed to know about it.
Right. That is so nutty.
Yeah.
And bizarre.
But also it just, I don't mean to cut you off, but it also, like, Gary Reed, Sean Kirkpatrick, all of these people that he has laid the groundwork before they even became public. Privately, he was laying the groundwork about how these people terrorized him. And then you had outlets like the Debrief writing articles about his superiors and making false claims about his superiors and riling up a base of people that don't need to be riled up. And because I think at some point, Art, you and I think this is the point of your two articles, and at least for me, this is what I took away from it, is that if this message isn't crystallized soon, someone is gonna get hurt. And it could be a lawmaker, it could be a podcaster like me, it could be anyone that is sort of throwing tacks in the road to make sure that the tires of this disclosure train, or not train but bus, sort of gets derailed off the road and has to stop.
Well, but that was a concern raised in a direct quote from Manny. I don't have the article right in front of me, in the first article, where he says, soon when is one of Lou Elizondo's followers going to shoot someone? Right. And because this is from Manny, who went public with his official name, Damay Lakoff, in my article. And the point is, he was talking rhetorically, not saying Lou is ordering anyone to, directly to create violence or attack people violently. And I'm not alleging that either. But you're creating a rhetorical environment of hysteria, and that this. And the other point that's especially maddening is, I think, when a guy like Rush comes forward with his apparent credibility and he says over like 106 days ago, he's going to tell the names, and he has given the names to the intelligence agency and the IG, and you're going to know where the bodies are buried. You are going to know where the craft are located. And he's created this hope and promise, and then it's not coming forward. And then the counter to the skepticism is, it's just part of the cover up and the evil cabal of the intelligence agency.
The way they've already pitched it is, and they've said this before in the past, is, hey guys, we need to straighten up because there's very important people high up, lawmakers and such, that are watching UFO Twitter, and they're getting cold feet about doing the disclosure thing. So these skeptics that keep throwing water on the fire, it's not helping, and basically targeting skeptics or any sort of voice.
I'm sorry, you're making a really important point. So is there critique of the skeptics, or is there critique of the extreme fabulous already on UFO Twitter who keep promoting hoaxes? Who is the critique, and who is making the critique you're referring to?
They're making. I've seen Sean. If I'm not mistaken, this was a while ago, but it was Sean Cahill and Lou Elizondo and that camp, and this idea of behave social media, because they're watching, and if you cause trouble, i.e. basically John Greenwald, like they did not like John Greenwald's foiling and sort of getting to the facts of ATIP and Lou Elizondo's role in it, and rocking the boat with the IG story, and they hate him. They hate John Greenwald. And so when they say things like that, they're inferring, skeptics like John Greenwald and of course Stephen Greenstreet, who was also part of their little team and then sort of defected once he realized, oh my God, all of these guys are lying and full of shit.
And what I think is very good about Greenwald is he's really not I think he's a centrist who really does want to believe, but wants to know where's the evidence.
Right.
I think that is why that was his original starting point. And so when he keeps his hat on as a journalist and researcher. He comes back with what he finds, and he is one of the guys who was targeted with this rhetoric that I did send over for comment to the FBI. I was not making a complaint against some of the alleged online harassers that I discussed in the second article, but it was reviewed, and they did say in response, without commenting specifically. So back to Greenwald, he was called as one of the roaches who should be exterminated.
Right.
Okay. In a public tweet, along with Greenstreet and a veteran whose handle is named B, who was basically raising questions about the extreme rhetoric and hate that was going on online. She is a believer and apparently an experiencer in her view, and she was targeted, and the online harassers were lumping her in and calling her words to the effect roaches or some other insect that should be exterminated. Now, here is the point. Anyone who has followed the rhetoric of authoritarian movements knows that this is literally taken from the playbook of Nazi propaganda, even though those people probably are always attacking others as being Nazis. So there's literally a film called The Eternal Jew, you can see on, which is Jews are likened to rats. And they show shots of the ghetto, and then they cut to rats, and it's creating this, they're image. Just like rats, creating. So this, by calling them essentially vermin or roaches that should be, quote, exterminated, how will a mentally unhinged person with access to guns or someone who wants to cyberstalk, how will they react to that? This is what is called stochastic terrorism. So for instance, Tucker Carlson did not order the guy who went into the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh and killed the Jews, or the people who went into that Southern church and killed the blacks based on the Great Replacement theory that he had well over 400 shows on. That the globalists are manipulating immigrants to come here to take your jobs and your vote 400 times. So somebody took up a gun and began killing Jews and black people.
Right.
Now, I don't think it's anywhere near that level, but it only takes one unhinged person to respond to this virulent messaging.
Yeah, well, it's happened in the past in this community where people have been killed.
Right. I discussed two murder cases, one in Scotland, where a guy was a follower of Blaisdell Sr., and it's not Blaisdell Sr.'s fault, but he put out a lot of myth making about him as the great contactee, and another person who was believed that his kids, and this was like a believing Christian who ran a surf shop, who killed his kids because he thought they'd inherited the reptilian DNA of his wife and their mother. Now, these are two murders, but the point is that they might have done it without all of that, but if it's nonstop, endless, repeated, and this guy in Scotland, he was big on Twitter. He had both accounts had over 2,000, a total in both accounts of 2,000 followers, and he regularly interacted. And in the first article, I actually give a link to his final email and you look at the emails of all the public influentials that he in the UFO Twitter community, where he had his ramblings about how his father is the Antichrist and the lady is coming to visit him. That's one of the angelic beings that Blaisdell talks about. So this is how the crazy stuff can filter into the deranged minds.
Yeah, well, if there's one thing I've learned in the 2 years interviewing, talking to, and interacting with the UFO community, I learned really quickly that almost every single experiencer or person who was, I'd say, lost in the rabbit hole, in my experience, a lot of them suffered from a form of PTSD, physical abuse, mental abuse, child abuse, and it's manifested itself within this community of support that is giving them this sense of comfort, and it's like a blanket for them. And that's how they are giving themselves therapy through this community. And it's at the same, in some cases, it almost militarizes them into a belief.
Right. And I also think, mental illness is prevalent outside the community. And I would say, if I was to guess, I'd say about 75 to 80% of true believers are benign. It could be 90% are benign in their actions and pose no threat to themselves or others.
Right.
And also, I don't think, and I don't like, in fact, I don't use the term mental patient to refer to David Grusch, because I've, one, in the people who cover from a mental health advocacy and reform point of view do not use the term mental patient. It's considered, kind of a slur. I don't use the term crazy either. What I'm saying is that there's a portion of the public at large, and and within the community that have mental health issues. And I don't personally, but I have no way of knowing. I don't think the level of mental health distortion would necessarily be higher among UFO believers than non-believers in UFOs. However, the difference is that that subset, and I have no idea of the portion, and I think it would be a minority, certainly minority, a subset of that minority is going to be more deranged and be more prone to taking dangerous or threatening actions, or just cyber stalking and general online harassment. And they're getting support for it either tacitly, and that is one of the points that I think is important. While there's no direct connection that has been shown in terms of the online harassment of average folks, out of a coterie around let's say Fessler Elizondo, I don't think there is evidence that they have helped publicize and go after high-profile skeptical video podcasters, but the average folk, I don't think, have been, targeted. What is true, though, is that I do think that there's this tacit acceptance within the more mainstream UFO enablers, where they sit by idly as a toxic hate environment grows up among a minority. And occasionally there's a pushback from within the true believers. Like I point out the quote from Inside r/UFOs on Reddit, where I point out that, they posted, "Stop doxing, Ken Klippenstein of The Intercept at his home," in cap letters. Obviously, and then they had to do it. They got pushback for even saying that. And he said, "Well, I didn't mean all of us on this Reddit forum are saying that." But that's the problem, is the sort of tacit acceptance and failure to call out hoaxes very vigorously and dangerous conduct vigorously, even if it's just online conduct.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, wait. Sorry here, Art. So my headphones just died. So now I've got a real technical issue as far as.
So I'll be glad to hold, and I'll be glad to take questions from you and your audience. And I'm sorry I at such length, but I thought.
Yeah, no. It's fine. Yeah, I think you won't have an issue at all filling in the time. So what I'll do is, there was one question here. There was actually two questions. So I'll ask you both, and while you're answering those, I'll see if hopefully I can get this worked out. But the first question was, have you ever seen a UFO? And I think I know the answer to that one. And then the second one was, what are your thoughts on Chris Mellon? And do you? I know as a journalist you can't say whether you trust or don't trust him, but what are your thoughts about Chris Mellon and the whole role of this?
Yeah, I think this is really significant. Okay, one, I personally haven't seen a UFO, but I did think that there might be some credibility over the issue of what are called fast walkers, in which certain satellites see unknown objects fly past, and that might be worth further research. In terms of Mellon, Mellon is a really interesting figure. When he was on the set, here's the thing: is he at one point, and I urge everyone to please look up a 2016 interview that Christopher Mellon gave Leslie Kean before she did her puff pieces on TTSA. He said, and he had been a high-ranking deputy in DOD related to intelligence in the Bush administration and Clinton administrations, that here's what I think is very valuable that he did. He said he's asked by Kean, while joining a transparency lobbying group that Kean is a very active member of, joining the board of, she asks, well, what is your thinking about? Do we have any evidence? Does the government have any evidence of this? And in 2016, and I think it's worth you finding that article and putting it in the video below. In 2016, he said, if anyone should know, I should know. I never saw any evidence that we had alien crashed or any evidence of alien visitations. So this is Chris Mellon circa 2016. Now, about a year or more later, he's on the platform in this pseudo news conference for To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences, where Tom DeLonge, Mel himself, Lou Elizondo, Jim Semivan, and other leaders are there. And no real journalists were attending it. It was just filmed to an empty auditorium, but made to look like a news conference. It's possible George Knapp was in the audience, but it was not a real news conference. And Mellon was then at that point joining in on TTSA, and you can go look up John Greenwald on this issue that I quote in my first article, when he presented, like probable proof of UFOs and alien visitations. He had a screenshot of, what he said was a UFO that turned out to be a Mylar balloon in his, at that original news conference. And Mellon, I think that the issue on Mellon is the most politically savvy and well-connected individual in the entire UFO advocacy community. Nobody understands the workings of Washington, the Hill, the media, and Congress as well as he does. So it was Mellon who got from Elizondo, and this is very detailed in the New Yorker article that I quote in the first one. It's Mellon knew the lay of the land. So Mellon had realized that Leslie Kean, so Mellon worked sort of hand in glove with Elizondo, although he's cagey about who personally handed the 3 Navy videos that later became world famous via To the Stars Academy and the New York Times. So what happened is that Mellon got those videos, and then he realized as he and Elizondo were the most important gets of Tom DeLonge and the new organization, that it would be valuable to the launch of the organization and company that they were joining, a for-profit company, if they could use the videos as, as part of the rollout over the next few months. So sometime perhaps in August of that year, Mellon obtained the video. Elizondo gets the videos, gets it to Mellon, and Mellon in turn gives it to Leslie Kean and has this big briefing. Literally the day that Elizondo resigns, approximately the day Elizondo resigns, and just a week or so before, later, in that same month, To the Stars Academy, TTSA of Art, To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science goes public. They then hold this news conference, and then they're the first ones to obtain these original Navy videos. And the point is, people talk to Mellon and go, well, Mellon doesn't need the money. That is absolutely true. He's very wealthy, but he certainly welcomes the fame, attention, power, and influence. So he's the one that everybody in the Hill will look to. He is the kind of certifier of this material, and who the smart people are and who to believe. And so his role as sort of the gatekeeper to the real influencers, the New York Times, people on the Hill, people in the Pentagon, of course, because of his background, is essential. And so I have no understanding of why a guy who in 2016 tells Leslie Kean, I saw nothing whatsoever to indicate in my years of service or his current knowledge that there's any evidence of alien craft or bodies or visitation. Zero. That's what he says in 2016. And then he's on the platform with Tom DeLonge in October 2017, pointing to a Mylar balloon and going along with the claims that they're part of a company that's going to build a spaceship that's going to travel instantly through the cosmos, derived from alleged alien metamaterials for the technology. It's mind-boggling. I don't have a good explanation. And by the way, Mellon got back to me personally, because one of the things that is featured in the first article is an excerpt of a draft, never filed legal complaint pulled together by the SEC, but never filed through a variety of reasons, including leadership issues that later led to the resignation of the leaving of the SEC by the ombudsman. They're named in a draft, never filed lawsuit for promoting investor fraud. And Mellon wrote back to me clearly and unequivocally denying that he had did anything wrong. Very clear conscience. He said there was nothing improper about what he did, but he went out of his way to clarify that he never was a salaried employee of TTSA. And that's important for whatever reason. He felt that it's a slight distancing. However, he was put forward as, a top advisor to them. And,
who do you think he's distancing himself from when he says that?
Say this again?
Who do you think he's distancing himself from when he says that?
I don't think I think he's just trying to clarify. I think in case, and again, I never said the SEC is currently investigating. I said the SEC is taking seriously, and I had independent sourcing for making that assertion, these allegations of investor fraud, and some of which were contained in a never filed, aborted lawsuit in 2019. I think his distancing is because he's maybe thinking, well, if they're going to catch up anybody, it's people who are on salary, as opposed to people who are just, aligned with and advisors to. But he also is trying to be very specific and accurate. And So you compare the articles he wrote for Politico, which is a very influential publication, and what he has said on Twitter and his blog about how he's definitely spoken to people who have seen, seen alien craft, or that he knows there are whistleblowers ready to come forward. You compare those claims he's making now to what he told 7 years ago when he was closer to being in the government. In other words, when he was actually just a year or two, a few years out of appearing in the government, he then says no evidence, and now he's writing in Politico, whistleblowers are ready to come forward. He would have to, if you had decent journalism or podcasting that would ask him tough questions, he might be asked about this discrepancy. I'm sure he has a good answer because he's smart, he's well educated, and he's incredibly political and sophisticated and media sophisticated. So there could be an audio video issue with Lou. I'm backstage, so I'll be honest that I'm not watching the video live of our stream. I'm on a backstage thing that I'm now on the platform. So I'm waiting for Lou's microphone.
Check. Okay,
and
there we go. I accidentally muted myself. Can you hear me? Shit.
In the meantime,
There we go. Can you hear me, Art?
Yeah,
okay,
right.
Sorry about that.
Did you have a problem?
So I think I accidentally hit mute on my microphone, so I apologize. Okay, so there's two questions I have for you from the audience. Both donations. Thank you guys, by the way, for the donations and the questions. And then if it's okay with you, is it all right if I open up this room to have people call in and ask you questions?
Sure.
Okay, great. I'll do that right now. So the first question is from Stoned Ape, and she asked, oh no, excuse me, she didn't ask a question. It was Darren Reed for $6.99. He asked, has anyone talked to Gary from Fessler's show lately? And so I don't know if you know about that, but
Gary is no, I haven't. In my first article, no, I haven't talked to him directly. And all I really know, Gary is the person who wrote that sort of confessional email to you. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah. So Lou knows that issue. I do not. I did not interview him, but in my first article, Spaceship of Fools, I provide screenshots and evidence about the harassment, doxing, insults, and the role of the Fessler show in sort of incentivizing attacks on Manny and his girlfriend, who remains unidentified. And one of the, and I also provide video things this is all public. These are public screenshots and public video. And so the two comments of Lou: imagine the effect on a rabid zealot who's unbalanced, and the government is hiding the truth and keeping the noble millennium that could be it's an inch away. Imagine someone thinking like that, and they hear Lou Elizondo say, karma is a bitch.
Yeah.
And I could take him behind the barn and beat him up, or words to that effect.
Right.
But none of it is, directly telling people go attack. But then he faced, including, I think Rob Heatherly was named or linked to in my article as an example of someone who was engaged in doxing and so on. So what I'm saying is, Lou knows the best, but the Fessler show has featured some notorious doxers and harassers as guests and or, they've served as producers. So what's the latest on that from his show? Where do things stand now?
Well, it's funny that you ask, because literally last night they did a show where Gary finally made an appearance, because I reached out to Gary in a private email again, just saying, hey man, like, it would be great if you came forward and sort of told your version of this story that you sent me in this email, you know, like before somebody gets hurt, like in exactly what we were just talking about today. And what's funny is when they read my email on their show, they thought that was a threat, even though I ended the email with you know, like, all my best, like,
Right.
you know, I hope everything's fine. So Gary finally after that show, I saw it this morning. Somebody emailed me, and so I wrote back to Gary. I was like, okay, you know, if that's the way you want to do it, Gary, I tried. Good luck with your best friend, because he calls Thomas Fessler his best friend, even though they've never met. And I called him a coward, and that he's nothing more than that. And then
now, why you're calling him a coward?
Yeah.
Make clear to your audience and me again. Why are you calling him a coward?
Well, because he wrote me an email last year that I didn't get to for almost a year, because I had I just stopped looking into that email account after everything went down with my show. And I received an email from him basically at the time that the whole, you know, sock puppet came to light, and the treatment of my show from others, and the silent boycotting that was going on from my show and the Big Phone Home 3. And he wrote me an email basically confessing, you know, that he's been part of this team with Thomas Fessler, Rob Heatherly, and Lou Elizondo, and they actively dox and go after people that are speaking out against Lou Elizondo, and that they actively do this, and that not only do they do this, but he has proof of it in recordings that he took of those conversations where they didn't know he was recording it. And they had also promised him a whole bunch of things in regards to him, you know, getting some stuff straightened out with people that were harassing him online in a completely different subculture than the UFO subculture. And so, you know, he basically, the email was like, hey, I'm sorry that I said all these mean things about you. You were right, and I have proof that you were right. And then Thomas Fessler does a show the next day after I reveal this email, and apparently I revealed Gary's email on my show, which wasn't intentional. That wasn't an intentional doxing.
Right.
And he claims that he got a whole bunch of harassment from it. I don't believe him. But what's funny is the next day, Thomas Fessler does a show explaining how Gary was not in the right mental place, but he didn't mean anything he said, and we're jumping through hoops trying to explain this very confession from the main producer of his show. And we haven't heard from Gary in 2 months. Finally, yesterday, he makes an appearance after I sent him this email, you know, reaching out to him, just taking another shot in the dark to see if he'll talk to anybody. And yesterday he went on the show with Thomas Fessler and basically lied.
This does have some bearing on the larger issues of harassment in the community. So what you may have mentioned already, but what's an example of a lie that he made that, you know, strikes to the issues you just discussed?
Well, in particular, I don't have the email in front of me because I didn't think we were going to get into this, but the idea of recordings that he made of them confessing.
Did he say on the show publicly that the upshot of how you summarize and characterize the email was false and inaccurate?
Basically, yeah. I mean, but at the same time, also confirming, even if I did record them, even if I did, I would have erased them by now. It's like, who says that? Like, either you recorded them or you didn't. And I have an email from you, man. Like clearly he was scared, he felt intimidated, and he felt like he was doing something wrong.
You know what this has a little echo of, but I'm not accusing Fessler or the people around. This sounds a little bit like what were called the Stalinist show trials.
Interesting.
Where people would have been convicted of people who were dissidents and stuff, and then they'd be trotted before the camera to confess their sins and pledge their loyalty to the dear leader Stalin. Now, I'm not saying that Fessler or UFO leaders are equivalent to Stalin in any way, but there's the process in authoritarian and conspiracy cultures to always remain loyal.
Well, they have a leader.
That is one.
They have a leader,
someone who's an influencer.
Yeah, and the only reason why Lou Elizondo is now having his boots licked by the Thomas Fessler show is because Lou Elizondo finally started talking to Thomas Fessler. Before he started going on that program, Thomas Fessler didn't like Lou Elizondo. He actually had called for Lou Elizondo to be arrested on another serial maniac show. The oh God, what's his name? And lives in a trailer park in Florida with his mom. I can't remember, but
okay. So but then so that was that's part of the situation where your ratings, including ratings you used to have, when you would have on prominent UFO proponents, advocates, and so on, it's a boost for ratings.
Huge boost.
A significant portion of of podcasting and journalism in this space is basically giving a free ride to people making claims and airing their grievances about the government or their enemies.
Yeah.
So what are some other questions your audience has?
Well, let's see here. Let's take a look. Let's see here. Well, let's see. Okay, well, there were, going back to SEC violations while I look for another question from the chat, and if you guys have questions, please ask them now. I'll put them in all caps so I can see them. The idea of hitting them where it hurts, and it seems like it would be the pocketbook. And the idea of, do you see at any point within the near future an SEC or some sort of fraud violation coming for, say, a Gaia Network or a Jeremy Corbell or a George Knapp, where they're selling books, films, TV shows on a belief system?
I think it's definitely.
How's it not fraud?
Well, yes, and one of the values, and I think in one of the hypertext links, I linked to some of the specific allegations about in my first article in the section on Nick Pope. Cal Korff outlined specific criminal and civil wrongdoing penalties around the arena of, consumer fraud and so on. So if you're getting money to make, bogus claims, at this point, as I said earlier, I think one of the skeptical and science-oriented community is not going to get a full hearing or get their views attended to until there is legal or criminal action against some of the fraudsters in this field. Now, the low-hanging fruit, and some of these people have been featured on Stephen Campion's show, are people promoting health cures like med beds or going up into a Stargate and get magic healing from aliens. That is outright healthcare fraud, and it's my view that so at this point, those people are not being criminally charged, but they could be for their alleged misconduct. That's the lowest hanging fruit. Then when you look, I don't see realistically, until an organization like the Committee for Scientific Inquiry or someone with the deep pockets in the skeptical community like Penn Jillette decide we've got to go after these people legally and get a top flight lawyer. I mean, an incredibly great lawyer who has a history of going after consumer fraud and knows how to build a case, because there's wide First Amendment coverage that they're permitted. So, but if you are charging money and you are claiming, like Corey Good, I personally traveled to Mars and the moon and worked on space colonies there as part of the, the legacy of the Alternative 3
Right.
mythical program. And I recommend every viewer to go to Weird Reads with Emily on YouTube and watch her show on Alternative 3, which is the origin of the super space program mythology.
I'll check that out.
It's so good. But the point of it is that those things should be, at least civilly liable, because they're taking people's money under false pretenses. But they might have a First Amendment thing. And also, they might start having little tiny disclaimers on their UFO conferences, and or Greer might be putting down in his expeditions to interact with the aliens, or his app that he's selling, like he could put an asterisk for I don't think he's done it yet though, but for entertainment purposes only, or words to that effect. However, there's a 7-year statute of limitations for most civil tort claims, and it could be done, but at this point, there's no movement outside of course actions that are being unfolded over the next few weeks and few months. He puts under the broad rubric of Operation Pandora's Box, and he has a background, in as being a consultant to different government agencies in the anti-terrorism field. So I'm just saying, at this point, I think that Jeremy Corbell, Gaia, George Knapp, and almost everybody else in this field are home free. Even and don't have anything to worry about legally or criminally.
I see your question. That's a bad kitty. I'm going to ask it here in a second. Even if it turns out that those people are solely responsible for, let's say theoretically, even if it's only a few $1 million, but let's say it gets into the few hundred millions of dollars, and contracts for places like Americans for Safe Aerospace, the Galileo project and things like that. If it ends up in contracts like that end up going nowhere, that ended up being a waste of government taxpayer dollars, do you see any sort of ramifications for that?
Yes, there absolutely could be. That's where, yes, there's something called the key tam provision, whistleblowers, and they didn't come forward. So, there's like millions of dollars waiting for anybody, in addition to that could So for instance, if OSAP is repeated,
right,
literally let's just use as a hypothetical, it's brand new. A program is getting $22 million.
I mean, we've already got public dollars dedicated to the Aero Office, and that is directly correlated from Christopher Mellon, Lou Elizondo, and the 2017 New York Times article, and Leslie Kean.
Right. The reason, yes, but the Aero Office and the UAP Task Force and NASA, none of that is fraudulent in terms of its intention or goals, or
but it could be waste.
No, it becomes waste when they continue. It becomes waste. The real waste comes in the private contracting.
Right.
That's where and that's what Americans for Safe Aerospace. That's whatever other versions. That is what now Avi Loeb's Galileo project is angling for, and now he also has a spin-off private company that's developing drones. What I'm saying is a number of key players in this space who have gotten a lot of attention and, have got, like Graves in particular, and other individuals, when they get government contracts to do research in the field or to assist Arrow in its mission, then that's where the big waste comes in. And what I was trying to make this point earlier is, if there had been real investigations by Congress of the actual OSAP program, which only ran for 2 fiscal years, 2008 through 2010, if at the time or near that time, somebody like the legendary, now deceased William Proxmire, who had pioneered something known as the Golden Fleece Award for total outrageous government waste. If a real congressional investigation, or led by someone like Henry Waxman, real congressional investigation looked into that program and found, hey, the bid went out without even mentioning UFOs. And even though it said, behind the scenes it was for UFOs, most of the research wasn't even on UFOs. It was chasing around goblins and werewolves and flying orbs on the ranch owned by Robert Bigelow, who got 22 million, and following people like Jay Stratton, who's named Axelrod in the book on this, Pentagon's Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, who claims werewolves followed him home and family members got cancer from him having been visiting the ranch. All of that. Do you imagine if there was a real congressional investigation and the real dirt about what actually happened under that program? And that is part of what is in the complaints filed that I excerpt, that Corps filed, that is still pending before the Council of Inspectors General, that was copied to inspectors generals at DOD and CIA and others. And so if there had been a really functioning normal media operation like we used to have in the 1970s, where we weren't driven by clickbait, and somebody like Seymour, do you imagine if Seymour Hersh or Woodward and Bernstein had decided to go after this $22 million program? Do you imagine? And then there were congressional hearings because I've been covering a lot of issues, as a young journalist and so on for decades. If there had been congressional hearings led by people with the investigative chops of Henry Waxman, William Proxmire, Senator Ted Kennedy, would they go all in? Or even, I don't expect anything at the level or detail of the J6 committee that was done. But what I am getting at is real congressional investigations backed by real media journalists tearing this program with a hypothesis and keeping an open mind that it looks fraudulent. It would have been a huge scandal.
Yeah. Well,
it was not. Instead, it turned out this other way. It's really like, and even Greenstreet had mentioned in his lies about Skinwalker, he said what the headline should have read: 22 million spent on goblins, werewolves, and flying orbs. Imagine how the whole landscape would have been changed if those real institutional developments had happened, as opposed to the hype and falsehoods and deceptions that we got.
Well, it's a failure on a lot of parts. And man, I'd love to dig into this even more, but I have two questions from the audience. And then we've also got someone waiting backstage. Filmmaker Red Panda Koala is waiting backstage to ask a question. So this first question is, do you have any plans to investigate any of the UFO claims with private aerospace corps?
Well, not at this point, because I don't have an assignment. The other point is that that question is based on a false assumption, which is that David Grusch and or Coulthard and or Eric Davis, who talked about off-world vehicles, have a smidgen of actual evidence. So I don't plan to investigate or look into a company that, companies that are being charged like McDonnell Douglas or Boeing with having alien craft. These are claims made about these companies by people with no evidence or a track record as promoting hoaxes or deceiving their audience. Now, as I said on another podcast, not a little one, but an open-minded podcast, I made this point. I'm open-minded. If I got a lead that was solid, and I had multiple sources that were credible of a craft, photos, aliens,
It'd be the story of a lifetime.
Yeah, let me tell you what I would do. I would easily get an assignment. I'd fly out to wherever it is. I would do interviews. I would vet their records. But more than that, I would demand, please give me the metal and give me the biological samples. I am going to send it to MIT scientists. I'm going to send it to multiple laboratories that are independent for their comment. And then, and then hopefully a story like that would, particularly since a story like that would presumably be able to have someone go on the record. Because if you remember, one of the things holding up the Harvey Weinstein scandal for a decade was nobody would go on the record. The women who were terrorized and stalked and raped and so on. So if there was a real whistleblower, as opposed to the hundreds that Stephen Greer claims, and a few dozen come forward and all their stories fall apart, or their actual credentials are not vetted. If there was an actual real on the record whistleblower
with facts
and evidence that could be vetted by scientists, boy, would I do that story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sure you saw, we talked about it at the top of the show, Neil deGrasse Tyson's rebuttal to David Grush's invitation to debate. He's like, debate what? Like, what are we going to debate? You have no facts, and I don't have access to classified information.
Right.
What am I going to debate you on?
Right. I think it was brilliant. However, the mythology that Grusch has classified information about secret UFO programs, alien craft, dead aliens, is a myth.
Right.
That is a myth.
Right.
And the myth has been so well promulgated that it's been so well promulgated that even Neil deGrasse Tyson believes that he has classified information that he has given the intelligence committees or the inspector general. But that isn't the case. He is just using that as a dodge and ruse for not actually disclosing the evidence. And from what I can determine, assuming even this is accurate, his quote evidence is transcripts of the interviews he claimed, that he gave to the House Intelligence and Senate Intelligence Committees. And at least the House committee didn't find it credible. Yeah. So all I'm saying is, unfortunately, there's the myth that he has secret classified information. That's where all the good stuff is, and that's where all the details are, and that isn't true.
Right. Okay, so obviously with any story like this, there's going to be detractors. There's going to be points where folks are like, hey, what about this? And so I think the biggest complaint that I've heard about your articles is this question right here, and I'm sure you've heard it already. It's from Estimate of the Situation, and he asks, I come in unbiased, in peace. I'm wondering about why Art Levine would continue to use Karl Korff as a source, who claims to be a fake captain in a fake secret program with fake CIA ties.
Yeah. Okay, so this is really important, and I'm not going to go into the details, but the people behind the websites and the Cal Korff, whatever slur they're making, those people are, almost all of them, or those who believe them, are tied to the Billy Meyer cult.
Right.
And he exposed that in the mid-90s. And almost all those slurs about him are nonsense. And what's happening, what is brewing, is potential, and they may already be filed, criminal and civil complaints against criminal and or civil complaints against some of the people behind these websites and Twitter feeds that are engaging in these smears. And I think when the evidence comes out in court, or there's the lawsuit or an arrest or an indictment, or I can credibly report a law enforcement investigation of some of those individuals, then I think they can weigh it. I would urge anyone who is buying these smears on Korff to really read Korff's excellent takedown, and also some of his interviews about the spaceships of the Pleiadians. And this individual asking the question may not be a believer in Billy Meyer, but it's a hilarious story Cal told, and he wasn't writing it necessarily to be funny, but he exposed them like as a young first in high school and then in college. And then he did this amazing thing. He drew the attention by showing, through computer graphics, how the stuff is faked. And then he had a brilliant idea. He then grew a beard, grew his hair long, and came out and went undercover to the cult in Switzerland, pretending to be a true believer who wanted to expose that terrible skeptic Cal Korff. And he got access through the wife of the ex-wife of Billy Meyer. He got access. So when Billy Meyer had photos of him with these lovely plating women in spaceship outfits, he had the original negative of the screenshot from a Dean Martin show where the dancers were in the shimmery outfits, and he used it for Photoshop. He also had the original photos of where Meyer places himself with dinosaurs, and he was also able to recreate all of the phony shots that Meyer had, including, to me, this is like a metaphor for the entire UFO false claim, dinner plates with strings, okay? Glued together dinner plates with strings. He had either or both. The actual reconstructing the video and showing how it could be looked like it was flying near a tree. But moreover, I think he actually has the original negatives that show the strings. So when I was interviewing him and I would ask, can you give me a clear example, along the lines of dinner plates with strings? So, and the people in that tradition, but now with new technology, I guess, as Stephen Campion has alleged, is third phases of the moon.
Yeah.
But they're much more sophisticated using modern video technology. But Meyer, and then he followed up on the leading champion. I don't know the Meyer story in full. The leading champion of him was an ex-CIA guy named Wendell Stevens. And then Stevens, as it turns out, actually went to jail, prison for pedophilia or some crimes involving sex crimes involving children. And Cal helped expose that and bring that to the public. So if you know this seamy background of the people in, so Billy Meyer is still alive, and true believers still follow him. And his photos,
he still alive?
Yeah, apparently ill. And there's now apparently infighting in the cult. Of course, they will deny we're not a cult; we're just a spiritual group. And most expert independent observers would say, yeah, it's a cult. So there's now an internal debate.
It's a comedy, man. It's a comedy. This whole community is a comedy.
There's an internal debate. Who's going to take it over?
And once he goes.
Yeah. And one of these guys keeps dodging debates with Cal Korff. Like they're promoted. And one of the lead spokesmen in the U.S. for the Billy Meyer organization is always dodging debates for various reasons. Yeah. So that's sort of the long backstory of all these smears about Cal.
No, I'm glad you answered it, and I'm glad we were able to ask the question. Steve Long, who's usually pretty neutral right down the middle, and he's a great source for information. He says Korff definitely has issues with his own claims, but he has also provided excellent, well-cited research. Humans are often right at times and wrong at times. No one is perfect without faults.
And what I think, here's what I said in the Spaceship of Fools. Here's what I felt was very, very important about Cal's work that he's doing right now by himself, and the larger skeptic groups and well-funded skeptics should get behind in terms of trying to create civil and criminal accountability for fraudulent claims and taxpayer waste. So someone earlier said, will any of these people be held accountable? Possibly, but he has things generated against Nick Pope. He has ethics complaints against Burchett, for instance, and one of the things that is missing in the accountability is putting people before a court of law or in a deposition or sworn testimony that can be verified. So Grusch is an example of someone who believed what he's saying is not lying. The best example of how a story fell apart is those amazing Corey Good videos when he sued his people, and then he's not knowing the depositions would be leaked, says, no, that's all my intellectual property. I know I never actually went to those programs. And so what I'm getting at is course value is, in the first time in 75 years of myth making, here's an individual who may not be 100% right on every single item, who's trying to hold fraud in this field and waste in this field criminally and civilly accountable, and also open to government investigation. Yeah. So I think when his filings get fully public, they ought to be reviewed by both skeptics and believers and people who may have their own views about Cal. But I think what he's doing is extremely important, and that's what's been missing in this field for 75 years.
Yeah. Estimate of the situation. If you have any follow-up questions to what Art just said, please put it again in all caps, and I'll try and get to it. But before we do that, let's bring in Red Panda Koala, who's patiently been waiting behind the scenes here. Let me bring him up, and we'll go ahead and put Art back in a solo layout here, so it's just Art on the screen. But Panda, you're up. What do you got?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Sweet. I disagree with both of you guys about UFOs, but I commend you both for calling out the hate group. And I'm curious what you guys think of Elizondo still following King Milkfart after being repeatedly told of his behavior. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the question. What do you think about that, Art? This idea that this harassment.
It's very telling. I based on there's a chronicler on the UFO scene who goes by the name, I think the account name is King Milkfart Harassment Archive.
Yep.
So
he's actually watching the show right now.
I don't. Yeah, probably could be. But in any case, his public or her, I don't really know, his or her public tweets on this issue documented pretty well that I've seen, and I think that is an example where an individual, that's an example where the tacit encouragement of hate groups by tacit, meaning he doesn't say, King Milkfart, go attack these individuals, dox them, go threaten their livelihoods, make complaints about them to government agencies, make up false crimes by people with the same names and accuse them of crimes like rape or pedophilia by people with the same names. Yep. I mean, he never says that. And so his hands are clean. It's all plausible deniability, but he has not called out, even though he has been pleaded to. So in my first article, Spaceship of Fools, I have these screenshots from not using a real name of the girlfriend of the guy whose public persona is Manny, saying, pleading with Elizondo to call his dogs off, essentially. Yeah. I don't know her exact wording, but you can click through in that first article all the screenshots and so on regarding the controversy between Manny's Who is Lou documentary, even if it might have had some errors, or had over-the-top rhetoric at some points. The point was he was raising some important questions, and it was like this full-scale fusillade that was sort of egged on by Fessler and Heatherly to a certain degree.
I think that's where we lost. That's where we started losing friendship, sort of influence with Lou Elizondo. Was that because behind the scenes, Thomas Fessler was asking me to put a copyright strike on that movie, that documentary that Manny made, and in my opinion, I was like, look, I don't like the documentary. I don't think it's a particularly good film, but I do know that he has every right to make that movie. Like, it's fair use. He's got every right to do it. I don't like it. He didn't ask me, but he doesn't have to ask me. Therefore, I'm not going to put a limit on someone's free speech just because I disagree with them. And that, I think, was sort of the starting point of the show sort of losing the access and the you know.
So that was before you raised the question about the about the stock puppet accounts, or that someone else?
That happened before we asked that question when Manny released that film. And we defended, you know, like Lou, we're like, hey, like Lou doesn't like the film, like, and I tried to watch the film, and I spoke to Manny, you know, behind the scenes before, you know, him and I, you know, we didn't see eye to eye. Now we're good. But, you know, I was telling him behind the scenes, I was like, look, from a filmmaker perspective, from someone who's been in Hollywood for 20 years, who this is my life. Like, I would go back and I would re-edit it. It's not that what you're saying is wrong. It's just, I don't think you're conveying the message that you want to convey through the film you made. And I would go back to the drawing board and try re-editing it. And, you know, so that's how I left it with him. But that was the, you know, that was the, I guess, the straw that broke the camel's back. Because I think before that, people were warning Elizondo, especially Cahill, and we have proof of that Cahill didn't like this show. He didn't like me. And I know that he was encouraging Lou to not interact with me, because at some point something like this was going to happen. And I guess in a way he was right, but, you know, I think it's because, you know, we've never been afraid to ask questions, and we've always, you know, I've had co-hosts that had opposite beliefs of me, so therefore they could challenge me on these belief systems that I clearly had, and they didn't like that. They hated that. They hated it. And so, you know, that was sort of the first thing. And I told, you know, Fessler to go kick rocks, especially after sort of the treatment and the abuse that I've seen him do to me and to women in the community. And the only thing.
Well, how many, here's a question, and then we can get off is Fessler, how big an audience does he have total? Or how many?
Well, since I ended my show, he's got a pretty decent audience. You know, he's got 300 or 400 people that watch his live streams every show.
And how many
what's funny is that he's been stuck between 6,000 and 7,000 subscriptions for almost 2 years. So people are watching him, but they don't subscribe to him, because I think they're there for the train wreck. They're there for the weird moments. They're there to hear people say unhinged things like Sawan threatening members of NASA. He admitted that on Thomas Fessler's show. I think they tune in to see him, to hear him vacuuming up his dog shit during a live stream. You know, like I think it's one of those things that people love to hate watch in a way. And what's great is I've got an army of people who hate watch for me, and they send me timestamps and clips, and then I turn around and make clips about it.
I see, sure.
But yeah, I mean, it's the reason why he's so popular is because he placates to those fringe, extreme believers, and he also placates to the people who are on the fence and that are new to this. And he's very pro narrative. Like, I just saw him the other night on his show, you know, talking about how they'll never question Grusch, how Grusch is the truth. And, you know, we have to back up Grusch, and we have to fight the naysayers, and we have to expose the people that are attacking Grusch. And we know who he's talking about. He's talking about folks like you. He's talking about folks like Cambian. He's talking about folks like me. He's talking about Green Street and Greenwald and the people that are not afraid to ask the questions. And
But my view, though, I wanted to, and your audience can weigh in,
Yeah.
in comments, and you can too, is I think the real danger is not so much from people. I mean, in that he is a part of a extreme minority that is sort of fomenting a hatred and of, questioning people is group that, even though he may have skeptics, somebody like Lex Friedman, who is fairly uncritical, I think, of some of the UFO proponents or people with larger platforms. And then, of course, News Nation,
right.
and, News Nation and the Debrief, which generally takes the side of, certainly on Grusch.
Yep.
And, there's story like you had that excellent show where there were some doubts beginning to creep in on the Hill, the Rising show.
Yeah.
Mildly, where's the evidence type things, and of course they're all owned by the next broadcast, whatever that
Next
larger
next
news.
Yeah.
Oh, Nap's TV station, Mystery Wire, the
Do you
Hill.
think that's just a coincidence, or do you think that there's something related to that?
I think they run independently, but I think everybody corporately can see that this is great for ratings and attention, and so they're going to keep it. They're going to keep it going as long as they can. They're not going to be. They're not going to be fomenting anti-government paranoia as blatantly as Fox News and Tucker Carlson did.
Right.
And Fox News was, because of its size of its audience, was the leading propagandist after the New York Times for UFO mythology, but more particularly the government cover-up angle, because it fed into their broader paranoid conspiracy deep state narrative that is central to the modern Republican and far-right authoritarian movement. You have to have millions of people believing that the government is covering things up, lying to you, and lying to you about vaccines, lying to you by claiming that Biden won the election. And it's a smaller audience, but it's helping feed the stream of the UFOs. The government is hiding the aliens from you.
Yeah.
I mean, and Fox was, and it's even though he's now on another outlet and he's lost, literally the day I talked about this in the first article, literally the day that Jesse Waters came in on Tucker Carlson's time slot after Carlson was forced out, what happened? Jesse had cattle mutilations in Texas story.
Right.
I mean, it's ratings gold.
Yeah.
And nobody seems wanting to give it up. And, there were some skeptical. I'm hoping that the bigger publications show some guts, maybe following some of the leads that I've done.
Yeah.
And certainly
I think they're gonna have to reach a point where they can't ignore it anymore, especially now because the Grusch story is falling apart every single day more and more. And I just wanted to go real quickly because we're hitting hour 2, and honestly, Art, I could talk to you for another 4 hours, but I think we're
nearing the end of the show. I'll be glad to answer questions. I'm open for your time, and hopefully it's been of interest to your audience.
No, it's been of an incredible interest. It's one of the highest viewed shows so far since we've been back. But the two things that happened today, one in relation to Grusch, was that Susan Goff from the DOD released I guess, what would you call this, Art? Would you call this a public statement, sort of the DOD's position on David Grusch's claims?
No, I to be honest, I hadn't seen. I was looking at different, skeptics. So tell your audience what the claim is.
Well, I was going to read it. Okay, so this is a Goff DOD approval for release. It's approval for release by the Department by the Defense Office of Pre-Publication and Security Review, DOPSR. So it means the material submitted by an individual does not contain classified information, controlled unclassified information, or other sensitive information such as that protected for operation security reasons. And that
is this a new, I'm sorry to interrupt. This is a new statement, or is this a statement I had in my article on September 8th?
I believe this might be from September 8th, but you sent this to me in the
yeah, I said, but that's not
okay. I thought this happened today.
Goff, circa a little while before my article appeared, but it's worth reading, and I have posted it publicly. So yeah, I sent it to you, but it is in my original article of September 8th.
Got it. Yeah, no, because I read it right before the show. I was like, man, it didn't click that this was part of your article. So, and then the other link that you sent me was from today. This was from 14 hours ago anyway. And it was an Axios article titled,
this is a very important article.
Yeah. So hyped up alien claims risk undermining future ET discoveries. And,
but can I ask you to go back to, even though the Goff statement is buried inside my article and I quote from it, I think it's worth reading the section continue to read the section on David Grusch, because I think your reader should really listen, even though it's filled with jargon. It's, the upshot of her jargon-filled answer is literally nothing that he has been cleared to say so far is either classified or sensitive in any way.
Right.
And that's why the new revelations by
John
Greenwald with the internal correspondence going, it's vague references, but there's nothing there sensitive. This statement is the kind of definitive DOD statement so far, but I think it's worth reading that section to your audience.
Yeah, definitely. I can do that right now. So by law, Arrow may receive.
But this is about Arrow. But the section on Grusch is the important one, I think.
Let me see here if there's any. Do they name
at the
Grusch?
top of it? About the DOPSR process.
Oh, okay. Yeah, got it.
That's relevant to DOPSR.
Yeah, so approval for release by DOPSR means that material submitted by an individual does not contain classified information, controlled unclassified information, or other sensitive information such as that protected for operation security reasons, and that the aggregate of information in the material does not fall under one of those categories. Approval does not imply DoD endorsement or factual accuracy of the material. The views expressed when individuals release the material publicly for non-official purposes are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Department of Defense or the United States government.
Yeah, and it's my view that if we had normally briefed members of Congress and reasonable, responsible journalists, every single time in any interview or podcast, they should read this to him. Sounds like nothing you've been saying is classified or secret or sensitive. So why can't you just tell us now?
Yeah, well, and that's what I wanted to highlight today after reading that, because I think it coincides perfectly with it. And we just mentioned it was this John Greenwald released David Grusch's DOPSR timeline.
Right.
And so Charlie Weiser beautifully put it together. And it was essentially, the timeline's really simple. So Grusch, DOPSR timeline reconstructed from the Black Waltz FOIA docs. 15 pages were released with redactions before disclosure, quote, would constitute a clearly unwarranted invasion of personal privacy, end quote. DOPSR receives the first request from Grusch for approval of speaker/author summary, the purpose of which was for, quote, future use as a speaker/author summary once out of government service. So he's basically putting in a DOPSR and asking if it's okay that he could be a speaker and an author at events and conferences. And the United States government's like, yeah, that's fine. Go for it. No problem.
Right.
No problem at all. And so then through the FOIA process response, they redacted the document has previously been released. It's essentially Grusch's bio with a statement he might use at a speaking engagement. So basically everything that was redacted was unredacted, and it turns out it's it's a resume of David Grusch and a summary of what he's been through. And I'm not going to read the whole thing right now, but basically there's no classified information in this presentation.
What is the area that was redacted? How does Greenwald and Weiser explain it?
Okay, so the reason why they say it's redacted, I'm going to get into it, is here, let me go here. So they have no objection. April 5th, Dopser receives Grusch's second request for approval of interview question submissions 202-30406 UAP. His email refers to it as a future Q&A for review. So I'm assuming this is either his interview, a permission to do an interview with News Nation or Ross Coulthard or Leslie King. And so David Grusch, this is an email from David Grusch, and he says, "Good afternoon. Here's a future Q&A for review. This was created on my own personal accord and was not a document that was part of my previous official work as a government civilian." And so then on April 6th, Wigman emails Klusnik about case 1707, highlighting the author's referencing sensitive areas. Klusnik responds, "These vague references are insubstantial and not a problem." The same day Dopser approves the Q&A. So here's the email from Michelle Wiggum, and she's emailing her boss, essentially going, "Good morning, Don. I have reviewed the interview questions for case 1707. Although he does not divulge specific sensitive information, the author makes reference to sensitive areas. I just wanted you to review it." To which he replies, "Good morning, Michelle. Vague references to sensitive areas like this are not a problem. If there had been something more substantial, the further review would have been necessary." And that's basically it. And so then they get to the part April 7th where all of Grusch's answers in his Q&A doc are redacted in the FOIA response. Since the interview is over and done, I think it's important we see what he wrote so we know exactly what Dopser considered, quote, not a problem. Charlie's, I don't think John Greenwald has come out with a theory of why this part is redacted, because the two questions are, can you expand a publicly unknown Cold War? Can you expand? The question is, can you expand, quote, a publicly unknown Cold War for recovered and exploited physical material that has been waged under the noise floor for decades? And then that answer is redacted. And then the second question is, what recovered physical material are you referring to? What is the nature source of the material? When was it retrieved? These are questions that the Dopser process is asking David Grusch, and his answers are redacted. Charlie Weiser writes, listening to what Grusch has said definitively as opposed to what he's been spun, it seems all the interesting stuff about alien bodies and flying saucers, RE programs, are merely regurgitated UFO lore. What's the stuff even in the Q&A replies submitted to Dopser? It seems clear that the Dopser redacted Grusch's replies to protect his reputation. They knew
we don't know
wacky.
that, but here's
That's his theory, but based off of everything that we've seen so far, it's not that big of a leap to think, oh, okay, well, they're just protecting him. They don't want him to look like an absolute maniac. Is that possible?
Well, that is possible. The redaction, but this is where the redaction of the material. It's important to reference what these officials say earlier, and what Susan Goff told me in her statement to me is these statements that are redacted are not redacted for anything having to do with sensitive disclosure or classified disclosure. It seems that the redaction is done by the government. They claimed in part for privacy reasons only. Is that is that claim about privacy applicable to what is redacted?
That's a
I'm
good.
not sure.
I'm not
just
sure
asking.
either. Yeah,
not
I'm not
sure
100%
either.
sure.
But the redaction is the redaction by the government. They have told us already, both in this internal memo and in literally nothing is sensitive or classified.
Yeah.
And there is a reference. I don't know why it's redacted. It does seem to me that Greenwald or others could take the statement by Susan Goff to me and just say, hey, you just said it's all unclassified and non-sensitive.
Right.
Can you at least disclose the thrust of what has been redacted? And if you want to remove and redact an individual's name, you can.
Well, isn't the better question though, why isn't the whistleblower showing us what the answers to these questions are?
Absolutely.
Like, hello.
Yeah, the whistleblower knows what it is, and the whistleblower. So there's, yes, that is clearly the point. It is within since nothing is classified, nothing is sensitive. Literally nothing. It's very important to know that I use as a counterexample. I'm using as a counterexample on an older classification system, but Robert Oppenheimer in the 1940s could not breathe a word publicly.
Right.
We're working on an atom bomb, the most powerful bomb ever to destroy Japan. He couldn't make the general statement, and he couldn't say, and here's the details of where we're working on the bomb in Los Alamos.
Right.
And here are the chemical ingredients. Here are the nuclear ingredients. None of it is done. In contrast, so if you imagine if Robert Oppenheimer went to today's Dobson and said, hey, I'm working on the A-bomb. Can I get clearance to give interviews? And they go, what are you, out of your mind? And they would send police and he'd be arrested. That's the last you'd hear of Robert Oppenheimer. No more bomb.
Yeah.
So the concept that this guy has the most explosive material in world history, he has it. And he is now won't disclose it. And I think the government, I wrote a letter and I have to check my email. I wrote an email after the statement to Goff saying, I don't think you guys have been specific enough in making clear just how free David Grusch is to. That statement is the last. I wrote her a follow-up email, and from what I could tell, I didn't hear back. Maybe in this wake of publicity and everything falling apart, they might jump on and put the nail in the coffin and go, yes. And the way they put the nail in the coffin would be John Greenwald cites the Goff letter to me, files of FOIA, and in 2 days he gets an answer. It's all unredacted with possibly a private name left secret. And we could see in full what he was telling Dobson. And we go, well, this sounds like
bullshit.
Nonsense.
Yeah. It sounds like pure bullshit. And that's why I think the House Oversight Committee, I think that's why lawmakers aren't taking it seriously. I think that's why half the room was empty. I mean, if this guy was legit, if he was a legitimate whistleblower that was going to come forward with legitimate claims, that room would have been packed. Not only with UFO people, but lawmakers. Every single lawmaker that could have squeezed in there would have been there. And they weren't.
Yes, moreover, they would have. I mean, I know for a fact that members of the committee were at least their offices were sent my earlier article, Spaceship of Fools. And I also, even at that point, was saying he's been cleared to speak publicly. And he was given a pass by both Democrats and Republicans to discuss whatever he wanted.
Yeah.
To discuss whatever he wanted while claiming the really good stuff would have to be in a skiff and classified. And he got literally not a single skeptical question. If there's any future public interviews with mainstream media, as opposed to cheerleaders or before Congress, he should be read the Susan Goff statement and these memos saying, and why is this redacted? Why can't you tell us what's in here? Because I just told you the DOD says it's not sensitive or classified.
Yeah. Well, also, like the idea of him getting into a skiff with a lawmaker hasn't even been approved yet because he can't get the clearance to get into a skiff to talk to a lawmaker.
Yeah, but that's the point is, I think that's kind of a ruse and we don't know the real story because one, nothing he has to say on these topics is classified. He's not been cleared to say anything classified or sensitive.
Right.
So therefore, and he also, the other point is any individual who he's not cleared to say anything that's sensitive or classified, but anything he knows on this topic, he's free to tell people, regardless of their classification. Moreover, there's this classification ruse going on out of Burchett and Luna, in that they're claiming, oh, we're being blocked because of this. But the thing is, neither of them have the high-ranking classification to receive sensitive, super sensitive information. So that could be the reason. But there's so much mythology and spin involved. If nothing he has to say is sensitive or classified, why does he need a skiff?
Right.
And the reason that maybe their skiff isn't granted is that these people with lower classification levels, like Burchett, don't have the clearance for classified stuff. But it's obviously both can't be true at the same time.
Well, could it be just as simple as, well, Grusch knows he's not going to get into a skiff with these lawmakers, so saying, I'll be more than happy to tell you in a skiff is a way to be like, I'm not going to answer that question, but I'm going to say something really interesting to make it seem very secretive and mysterious.
Well, I think this is the point is nobody in any institutional power in media, real institutional power, i.e. the Times, the Post, the Wall Street Journal, or a congressional committee with a skeptical questioner, is calling Grusch on any of his bluffs directly.
Right.
So this point is, so when he's saying, so basically the game right now is part of the 75-year, it's a cover-up narrative.
Right. Yeah.
75 years of conning UFO believers.
Yeah.
We're moving in,
yeah.
We're after 75 years.
And not one legitimate whistleblower has come out. Not one.
Right. And there's an excellent 2-part series by Cambion that I'd urge anyone, either skeptic or believer, about the 14 whistleblowers, many or most with military credentials, promising to come forward with stuff and it all falling apart and never being proven. But the thing about it is that nobody is calling his bluff. And so it's in Burchett's self-interest to continue the cover-up narrative. And I'm sure there are ways in which to set up a skiff, even for people with lower classified rankings.
Yeah.
So we don't know what kind of foot dragging or little bureaucratic obstacles or games Burchett's team is pulling so they don't have a skiff. Yeah. And I think the longer they keep putting it off, the better it is for the cover-up narrative, no matter how much the intelligence community is screaming at them from the office. We did not investigate a single one of his alien claims. Yeah, those 40 people, no, we never talked to them.
Yeah. No, it's funny. I mean, it is a comedy. Okay, so one last question and then we'll let you get out of here. It's from Steve Long, and he asks, has Art been researching Enigma Labs at all, and the refusal to provide even basic information on sources of funding and ownership while vying for taxpayer money to surveil taxpayer cell phones?
I will put out, I know supposedly Peter Thiel has some ties to it, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's correct. He he's supposedly a secret funder of them. That's an allegation.
Right.
If anyone knows stuff about Peter Thiel and his involvement with Enigma or what they are doing, it looked a little fishy to me in this regard. And if anyone has any deep knowledge of Thiel and Enigma, and I am not alleging anything wrongdoing by Peter Thiel, I don't even know if he is actually connected to Enigma. But if anyone knows anything about it, you can try to contact me via my Twitter account, or if you're a serious researcher, Lou will have my email and phone information, because I do think there's something fishy going on with Enigma, in that they are creating a kind of grassroots through, as far as I understand it, and Lou, please correct me, this is my understanding. Enigma is doing some kind of grassroots discussion of these issues. I don't know much about it. What do you know about Enigma?
I know that they do street campaigns that are very like urban, like in New York City. They were putting, so they paid a company to put stickers all over New York City with a barcode that you could scan to download the app, and it just has one question on the barcode, and it's like, are you UFO curious, or something like that, something with UFO.
So they're holding these meetings. A friend of mine has a video, and I could find a little bit about it. There of a meeting that was held in Norfolk, Virginia. And it is curious, because there's a remote possibility that, while it's unclear. I think it's designed in part to claim is people who see things can use the app to report sightings, I think is the concept. That's the claim. But also,
you have no rights over it.
What?
You have no rights. Once you submit it through their app, you lose all rights to that footage. They can use it however they want.
A way to harvest the names of UFO believers for future, political or propaganda or political movements.
Well, I mean, it's also, it's a great way to make an email chain.
Or just to raise money. I think it's a very smart concept. And if anyone knows more, they're free to reach out to me if they've got solid information as opposed to speculation.
Well, what I did is I looked into the production company that made their recent commercial. I was trying to look up the actors and the production company on IMDb, because it looks like a very well produced commercial. So I'm, I don't have that info.
Please post and please post about it, and it probably is worth. It is something new that
that would be a money trail that maybe you could get some answers through. Because if there's a production company, that means that somebody wrote a check to that production company to get
they're
that.
under no obligation to.
No, of course not. Yeah, no, of course not. But okay, I'm sorry, I faked you out. I have one last question. It's from Kimball Mortensen, and he says, did they talk about how he might be framing the story as, quote, all UFO people are terrible harassers?
Yeah, I'm trying to distinguish between that, and if I always use terms like few, a minority, I'm absolutely not. I said on this, I would say 95% of everybody in the UFO Twitter community is genuinely interested and acts in a benign manner, but there's a subset, and it could be less. You'd have to have someone, a group monitor it. What I'm saying is, by allowing conspiracy theories and anti-government paranoia to reign unchecked and unchallenged from within the UFO believer community, with some exceptions, like, some of the people monitoring this behavior online, is potentially dangerous. That's all I'm saying.
No, that's a good point. It's a good point. And I think I'll also just add, I love how people have a problem with that aspect of it, but they don't have an issue when Gary Nolan is in conferences or podcasts talking about how you have to, if you're able to see UFOs, that means that you're on the spectrum / special. sort of intimating that it kind of pissed me off because I was like, wait a second, are you saying I'm on the spectrum, Gary Nolan?
Right.
Because I haven't been clinically diagnosed with being on the spectrum, and I've seen a UFO. I mean, I was a kid when it happened, but I mean, that's kind of insulting, you know, like this idea that everyone who sees a UFO is, you know, has a mental condition.
Well, I certainly haven't said that, but take away the mental health framing, but you are special
Right.
is you know, it's part of the original seeding of what in some respects could later for a subset, a tiny minority, become dangerous
Yeah.
if they believe they're special and they're following their, you know,
well,
leaders.
every time you dig into these your special theories because you have these experiences, it always leads to white aliens, you know, with blue eyes, and they all look alike, they're all one race, and it's just like, don't you guys haven't you heard this somewhere else before?
Yeah,
You know?
a lot of that, and some of that. There's some critical articles about the starseed notion, having some of this belief in these, you know, Nordic type aliens. But a lot of your special, and again, Weird Reads with Emily's YouTube channel looks at some of this, the legacy of Helena Blavatsky and her work. But also Dave Troy has published some stuff online about the legacy of certain segments of the UFO community back in the 1930s being sort of proto-fascist and having racist views. And there's elements of that in some portions of the UFO community, but not a majority. So my view is, if all I read was the New York Times and the prominent promoters and Fox News, and listen to them and listen to Gary Nolan and all the influencers and Steve Gerber, I would absolutely believe there are UFOs that have visited us, and the truth about the alien visitations have not been disclosed by the government that's covering it up, either because of, you know, ontological shock, or they want to keep free energy from us.
Yeah, it's always the free energy.
I would believe it if I did not have critical thinking skills based on my background as a journalist.
Right. Yeah, and I don't even think you have to be a journalist. Just critical thinking skills, you could just stop there, and you should be able to, at some point, come to the same, I don't want to call it a conclusion, but the same sort of feeling, oh, this is just bullshit. It's a money grab, bullshit
I think it's very important to distinguish between no evidence so far versus it's all bullshit and it's never happened.
It's 75 years, Art. You know, like when I say no evidence, it's like 75 years and we've got nothing.
So
my
viewing is,
I was going to say, in any other realm of conversation, if we had 75 years of anything else saying this is true, this is true, this is true, and it's 75 years, not one fact has been presented on the truth, I think it's safe to call it bullshit. Like, I think
I agree, but even Michael Shermer and Mick West, I'm sort of taking even Michael Shermer, who's so eloquent on these issues, and Mick West says, you know, he's open to the possibility that it might be revealed at some point, but based on evidence so far, zero evidence, nada, as I quote Shermer, zilch, zero, a big fat zero, and everything else is in what West calls the low information zone. Unfortunately, and this is a very critical point for people seeking to have some discernment about their interest in the issue, is it's a question: are you part of a cult-like mentality, or an over-eager zealot follower of a conspiracy theory? Is, can your beliefs be falsified? Is there any evidence of any kind produced by anyone that you would accept as disproving your belief that aliens are real and the bodies have been captured and so on. And for many on UFO Twitter, their beliefs can't be falsified. There's always some excuse. And Shermer also has a wonderful video called "There's a UFO in My Garage," where he explains all the excuses for not having the evidence.
Right.
Contrary, I agree. I think that if somebody like Mick West was called up, by the Pentagon or even a private company, say we have the craft, he would bring scientists and special effects experts, and he would look at it and he would make sure that multiple independent, academic, highly credentialed scientists in leading institutions would examine the metallurgy and the alleged biology and go with what their findings were. Right. And if they concluded this is not a wonderfully designed fake craft by a Hollywood type designer, he would then, if the evidence came forward, he would then say, well, at least this one is real, and a lot of my criticisms about no evidence. But he would then concede. I would argue a skeptic would be able to change their views based on the evidence.
Of course. Yeah. And also, as a skeptic, in quotes, I want to be wrong. Like, this would be the coolest story of all time. And I think that Mick West feels the same way. I'm sure you feel the same way. It's like, I don't have an issue changing my viewpoint on this, but the evidence, like Jack Brewer says, it's not only got to reach a point, it's got to overflow that point. It's got to go
that's
over.
Why that dictum, that's what was so bizarre that I seized on when Carl Sagan's dictum still holds. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof.
Right.
And Avi Loeb pretended to agree with that. And then when he's now in a naked money grab, I am alleging, he says extraordinary claims require extraordinary funding.
Yeah.
So that kind of gives the game away.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's like they tell you exactly what they're doing, while at the same time, sort of leading you down the rabbit hole. It's wild. Well, on that note, Mr. Art Levine, this was a fascinating almost 3-hour conversation. I really enjoyed it. I definitely got to have you back because I'm sure there'll be more articles and more revelations as we continue with this UFO saga.
So thank you for having me on your show.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. And yeah, a lot of people loved it as well. So I'm happy we were able to work this out. And apologies for for my headset dying here. That was an awkward moment, but we worked through it.
I can talk over it, as you can see.
Yeah, no. I had no worries about you filling in that time whatsoever. I was actually like walking through my house looking for another set of headphones going, I'll be fine. Art could go for 20 minutes, no problem. Like, just calming myself going, oh my God. But Art, man, yeah, this was a lot of fun. I loved your humor aspect to it. And I look forward to laughing about this more with you in the future.
And also, I do want to give a plug.
Please.
For people who want to know more about mental health issues, I have a book out called Mental Health Inc. I think you mentioned earlier, but just a reminder, which also has a resource called Mental Health Incorporated, Mental Health, Inc., How Corruption, Lacks Oversight, and Failed Reforms Endanger Our Most Vulnerable Citizens. And it also has a resource guide at the back. And if you get the ebook version, all of my lawsuits, academic studies, research are live hypertext, and you could read them directly in the end notes.
Yeah. I think something just threw me off. I was going to say one last thing there, but I just totally lost it because I was reading some in the comments here. Art, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that was an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for your good work and others in this field trying to shed light and keep people in this field honest. So
that's what it was. Art, real quick, before you go, if there is someone who has experienced a close encounter and what they think is an extraterrestrial presence or alien or whatever, and they're going through ontological shock or some sort of PTSD, it's really affected them in a very, very visceral way. What would be your best piece of advice for that person to seek help? Where would you point them?
Well, that is really, this is the issue. I would think that they have to deal with the real life present day symptoms that they are facing. So they're not going to find in most cases. One thing they have to stay away from are some of the kinds of people who work with Paul Benowitz or John Mack or others. You've got to stay away from hypnotists who are going to try to regress you to learn more. That field, as Jack Brewer so ably documented, is so filled with psychological harm and fraud. But the individual needs to be able to tell whoever their personal experiences, but also get a handle so they can manage their symptoms. So if it's stress, they need to learn stress reduction techniques. If they're having depression over it, the techniques, regardless of what is causing it, is, like cognitive behavioral treatment for depression mixed with medication. But they can hold on to their belief systems and belief while managing the mental health crisis that they're facing. I think that they may, in dealing with secular or skeptical people, say, well, you may not believe this, but this is what happened to me. But try to get mental health help for the symptoms, but understand that some people are going to say, well, you're crazy, but you're not. So the concept is, you're not crazy for having these experiences. However, you should try to address the symptoms and stress, and hopefully people be open-minded, and just when you discuss it with people, compare it to in dealing with secular therapists or doctors, go, well, this is my personal belief and here's what I experienced. It's comparable to religious beliefs other people have. So then you put it in that framework. Well, you can't call someone crazy because they believe the reincarnation or the resurrection of Jesus Christ or other miraculous events or other elements of religious belief, even if you don't believe that it's
there is a difference in believing a story from 2,000 years ago and then having something come into your living room and take you away somewhere.
Right. I think that is the problem with it is, and I urge, I think anyone who's been an experiencer should read Jack Brewer's book called The Grays Have Been Framed. And where he does a very definitive job is looking at the complete horrific practices engaged in by people in the alien abduction movement, both in terms of false claims and the therapists who did regressions and led to psychological damage and exploitation. The second half has a controversial premise that much of the UFO mythology derives primarily from intelligence agency operations and so on. Could be true, could not be true. But I'm not saying it is or isn't, but that first half is a really important thing to understand. And now the whole abduction mythology, and I think Charlie Weiser has material in her blog on this, his or her blog, about the whole abduction mythology is getting new purchase because Barney and Betty Hill, there's a Netflix movie coming out backed by the Obamas, and it's their birthday this week. And so there's a lot of discussion about them and retelling of their stories. And it's worth looking online for some of the skeptic commentators about how those claims are falling apart. And I know that Korf has a book coming out sometime soon regarding this particular case. And that is sort of the foundational abduction case along with Travis Walton. And the blog, I think it's by Charlie Weiser, you might know about both the Walton and the Barney Hill cases are worth looking at. But for the individual experiencer, I respect your having this belief and what you happen to have felt and seen. However, the question is, how do you manage any stresses or harmful outcomes that you might face as a result of openly expressing the belief? Regardless, if you're having mental health problems, please seek help.
Yeah, that's beautiful. No, I just wanted to hear your aspect of that, especially considering your expertise in the field. So I appreciate it. I think that's very useful. Art Levine, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you again, sir. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. That was Art Levine, everyone. Holy cow, what a show. I'm going to put Art in the back here. And, let's do this. Hello, everyone. Okay. So, man, long show. Didn't think it was going to go that long, but had a feeling it might, if that makes sense. Anyway, you guys, it was a lot of fun. Let me do this here real quick. Hold on one second, guys, because I want this to be smooth and cool and all that stuff. Let me do this. Move you. There we go. Aha. All right, you guys, that was the show for today. I really appreciate everyone's participation in the show. Thank you for calling in. I've been reading the comments. I know you guys are going back and forth, but it seems like it's been respectful for the most part, so I appreciate that. Pat Calabria, Dana Shadell, Compliziert, Steve Long, Estimate of the Situation, Kimball. I know there's a lot of folks here. I know we don't agree on the belief of this. I think that's where we separate, but when given the proper opportunity, I think most of us can keep it respectful, and most of us can at least have a conversation on these things. And that's what this space is all about. And so that's what we've transformed into, is just having a more critical eye, more critical thinking when it comes to this topic, and sort of being careful not to give advice on where to go or how to deal with these situations when and if you do come across them. So from that aspect, I really appreciated Art Levine's perspective. And you guys, I had an absolute blast today. I'm not sure when we're going to be back, but I'm sure it'll be soon because there's a lot of stuff going on. So before we get out of here, of course, like, share, subscribe to this show. If you want to help support the show, we have a Patreon, which we've been getting new Patreons. On the next show, I'm going to shout those new Patreons out. So thank you guys for joining the Patreon. Really, it helps. It helps me do this show, and helps, with the podcast costs and all of those things. So yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate the support. With that said, thank you for embarking on this journey of discovery together. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and thank you for subscribing to Lou Reviews. Until next time, thank you for helping raise the bar. I really appreciate it, y'all. Have a wonderful night. Peace out.